Oh, I'm excited. I'm excited. We got a good bit of Bible jumping to do today, boys. Welcome to the Morning Bible. It is wonderful to have you once again. We are in Luke, almost at the end. We're going to do this chunk, and then tomorrow we're going to do probably the smallest video we've done on just 2 verses. But today we've got a longer bit, and we are going to be hopping about in our Bible a little bit to unpack this one and understand what it means, because it's a really challenging passage. I sort of sat down this morning and was expecting, let's get a good strong passage here, and it is a strong passage, but it was a passage that just knocked me back a bit, and so I've done a bit of reading around my Bible, and yeah, I'm very excited about what I found. So let's just jump straight into it. We are Luke chapter 14 verse 25. It says, "Now great crowds accompanied him, and he turned and said to them, 'If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciples. Whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to mock him, saying, This man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king, going out to encounter another king in war, will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet someone who comes to him, who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, any of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple.'" Wow! So Jesus literally starts off this passage saying, anyone who comes to me and does not hate his own father, his own mother, his own wife, his own children, brothers, sisters, and even himself cannot be my disciple. So what? I've read this before and I've heard things about this before, but it very much caught me off guard this morning. I was sort of sat there just like, sorry, what? I have to hate all these people? I don't want to hate all these people. I love these people. They're great people. So let's unpack what Jesus means. So to do that, first we're going to hit the nail right on the head straight away. And say, Jesus does not want us to not love the people around us, alright? For this, we're going to go back just a few pages to Luke chapter 10. We read this, I don't know how many weeks ago, a few weeks ago now, to the parable of the Good Samaritan. This is the story where Jesus talks about what it looks like to love the people around you. So let's read what the guy asks him. A lawyer comes to Jesus and says, "What shall I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus says, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" And he answered him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbour as yourself." Right? So this passage is very clearly Jesus saying you must love your neighbour as yourself. So that means both you love yourself and you love your neighbour. So what's going on then? Jesus tells us here that we need to love ourselves and love our neighbour, but he says later on that we need to hate our wives, mothers, fathers, daughters, all the rest of it. We need to hate everybody. We need to hate ourselves and follow him. That seems very counterintuitive. And so what we're going to do to unwrap that is go to another passage. So this is much more of a rewind. We're going all the way back to Genesis for this one. Genesis chapter 29, verse 30 and 31. I can just read it if that's like quite far for you to skip to. It says, wait, I'll give you some context actually. So this is when the Bible is talking about Jacob, and you don't really need to know tons of context for this story other than Jacob has 2 wives at this point. He has a wife called Leah, who he is obliged to marry because of an arrangement he's made with someone, and he has a wife called Rachel, who he loves. Okay? And so it says, "So Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years. Then verse 31, this is the key bit. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So we don't need to worry too much about the Lord opening people's wombs and stuff at the moment. But what we see here is that the Lord saw that Jacob hated Leah. So that seems like Jacob hates Leah. But you look at the verse before and it says, Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah. So actually, we see that hate doesn't necessarily mean what hate means in our context of this person's despicable, I don't like them. Hate here is a comparative term. It means you love something this much. So in this case, he really loves Rachel. And so by comparison, he hates Leah. When in reality, he just loves Rachel more than Leah. It says, the notes in my ESV Bible for the passage we're on today say, hating is a Semitic expression for loving less. So hating doesn't necessarily mean you have to detest that person, but it means by comparison, you love that thing significantly less. So it isn't so much a thing of saying, when Jesus calls us to hate our family, this isn't Jesus saying you must detest them, despise them, spit on them, be horrible to them. This is Jesus saying, by comparison of how much you love me, you have to hate these people. That's how far the gap between your love of them and your love of me should be. You can love them tons and tons and tons. You can love these people so much. But to go back to the Good Samaritan passage, you must love the Lord with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind. He just says, love your neighbour as yourself. Love your neighbour as yourself. There is an allocation of love for yourself. There's an allocation of love for your neighbour. But if you go too far in loving yourself or loving your neighbour and start to put either yourself or the people around you over God, then there's a serious, serious problem, because you're supposed to be loving God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, all of your strength, and all of your mind. God is calling for utter love, a complete dedication of self to Him, in a way that by comparison you would be seen as hating the people around you because you love God that much, right? Hate and love, hate in specifically is a comparative term used in the Bible to describe when you love something so much that you hate the things by comparison. It doesn't mean that you don't love them. God calls us to love our neighbour as ourselves. Jesus gives the parable of the Good Samaritan straight after saying this, where a Samaritan, reaches out to a man who he sees beaten and injured and on the brink of death by the road, reaches out to him, shows him love, helps him, takes him to an inn, pays for him, does all these things. That's love, that's real love. And Jesus isn't saying don't do that. He's saying you have to do that. You have to show that love to yourself and to your friends. But he's saying you have to utterly commit yourself to God. To go back to today's passage and read the next bit. Whoever does not bear his cross and cannot come after me cannot be my disciple. So Jesus is saying, look, you have to bear your cross, you have to give me everything, right? Bearing your cross, you were carrying your torture method, your execution method on your back and going to the site where you're going to be killed. Jesus is saying you have to have that level of commitment to me. You have to bear this with all of your strength, all of your mind, all of your soul. You have to put this above anything else. And that doesn't mean don't love the people around you. For the last few passages we've had at dinner, Jesus talking about how you should heal people on the Sabbath because it's a loving thing to do, and how at wedding feasts there'll be guests of honour who are loved and more exalted than others. There's so much capacity for love between people, but Jesus is saying your love for God has to be totally transcendent of that. It has to eclipse all other love you show. All of the other love you demonstrate to the people around you has to be done via a love of God, if that makes sense. You have to love God first, and because you love God, you will become more like Him, and by becoming more like Him, you will be good to the people around you, you will be loving to the people around you. It's a big challenge. So let's quickly just unpack the rest of this passage as well, because there's still a lot more he says. He says, for which of you desiring to build a tower does not first sit down and count the costs, whether he has enough to complete it. So Jesus here uses a building analogy. He says you're not just going to start building a tower without knowing what resources you have first. That'd be ridiculous. Without knowing how much this tower is going to cost you. Because otherwise you lay the foundations and then you run out of money. You run out of materials, you run out of workers, whatever. And you only get this far and then you haven't got a tower. That would be ridiculous. You have to count the cost before you do it. You have to take inventory before you do it. And the same thing with a king going into war. You have to count up your army and your enemy's army and know your terrain and know whether this is something achievable. And if it isn't achievable, then you give up, you know. Jesus is saying it has to be the same with faith. You have to know the cost of following God before you do it. You have to know that you're going to be putting God above your family, that you're going to be putting God above your wife or your husband, that you're going to be putting God above your own kids. Those are huge, huge demands that by comparison with your love of God, you have to hate these people. And this is a command that's very difficult to actually live up to. It's very difficult to do, but it's something that we have to strive towards, that we have to keep pushing towards, because the closer you get to that, you'll find the more loving and more good you actually are to the people around you. This isn't a matter of looking at God in your life and looking at the people in your life and going, oh, I love all these people a bit too much, let's love them less, let's drag them down. No, it's an idea of you look at the people you love and you say, all right, I love these people this much, so how much more have I got to love God? How much more have I got to serve God? And you push into that relationship with God. You work hard building that relationship, spending time with God. Jesus isn't calling us to love any of the people around us any less than we already do. He's calling us to love God more than we do. He's calling us to push deeper into a relationship, to seek God more, so that eventually, by comparison, we'll be seen as hating these people because we just love God so much. And by loving God so much, we love the people around us more. I feel like we've gone in circles a few times now, but I'm just trying to really hammer home this point. You've got to love God. You've got to love God. Jesus is saying you have to be willing to put down everything you have and follow me. You have to be all in. You have to love me with all your mind, all your soul, all your strength, and all of your heart. That was the other one. That was the one I missed. You have to love me with all of these things. You have to give yourself entirely to me. And God honours that. We have so many passages of Jesus talking in Luke about how God honours things like that. How if you invest in God, if you trust God, if you build your life around Him, He will honour that and He will reward you for that. Those rewards may not be earthly things, it may not be riches, it may not be things that come in our life. We may have quite a hard life on earth, but those rewards will be in heaven and those rewards last forever. There was a passage before where they don't get attacked by moths and there's no hole in like the thief's bag in heaven. Our treasures don't deplete, our treasures don't grow old in heaven, our treasures are forever. And so it's about building your treasures in heaven. I feel like I've just gone off on like a million tangents today from this passage, but it's such a good passage because it just slaps you in the face and is like, are you doing this properly? Do you know what you're doing here? Do you know what you're committing to here? How much do you want to follow me? Because it should be more than that. It's so good. Oh, it's so good. I'm going to leave it there today. I'm very excited for tomorrow's passage. It's a super short one, all about salt. But we'll get to that tomorrow morning. It's been a pleasure. Thoroughly enjoyed this one, and I will see you all tomorrow. Much love. Bye bye bye.